Beyond Sports.
So welcome to Beyond Sports with Paul and Jeremy. Today we're just going to be talking about players chasing championships. And what I mean by that is oftentimes you hear a lot of players saying, I want rings. I want the chip. Like, I want to go to a team where I can get that, right? And that's their justification for leaving the team that they're on. And I wanted to kind of dive deeper into that specific subject to kind of see, is that even something, or is it just something totally different? Is it a waste of time? What is your take on that? That you hear Paul George, you saw 80, we had the everybody down in Miami, we had Boston, we had all these different guys. What is your take on championship chasing? And then we'll take it a little bit further with championship chasing now compared to how it was in the past.
Well, with this issue, as with a lot of issues, I think there is a lot of nuance involved. And there is sometimes, for me, kind of a blanket negative reaction to it initially when you say someone's chasing championships. But there's also a context dependence, in my opinion, where when you have a player who's played for, say, a losing franchise, let's say this is the NBA, and he's played for a losing franchise for 15 years. And in his 16th year, when he's kind of older, doesn't really have the opportunity to win a championship with that current team, he decides he'll just go off in free agency. The team lets him go. And he's done everything in his career except win a championship. So maybe he goes to the team favored to win the championship. And when we were growing up, that didn't happen that much. Yeah. But when it did, you always rooted for that player to win the championship.
Exactly.
So I think there's a lot of context in that, because you want to feel like a person who's put in the work, who tried to do it a certain way and maybe couldn't, would be given the opportunity to at least play for a championship and experience those high leverage moments and kind of the more exciting part than what he's been used to. But I think there's also the other side of the coin, where if a player decides that they want to win championships at a younger age and an earlier point in their career, it does kind of look bad, because at some point the chase has to stop. And if a person starts doing this chase when they're in their third or fourth year, maybe, are they ever going to settle down on a team, and will they ever want to? So I think there is kind of a context to it, and I'm okay with it if a player has put in a lot of years and they've not been successful. Then they decide that they want to do what it takes to win a championship, because that's a part of their career that's kind of lacking and missing.
Yeah. I think a couple things are interesting about that to me. I'll start with the first part of it, with the older players, right? And you said that how it used to be was when an older player joined a team, it's I remember we had, he looked like Popeye Jones, but oh my gosh, what's the dude that played for New Orleans?
David West.
David West, yeah, right. So we had David West, and near the end of David West's whole career, I guess, ish, he was in that mindset, right? He wanted that ring, and it's still kind of fairly recent. But while he was with the Pacers, he was kind of a little bit of an enforcer, but had a shot at a ring, and then he left and then went to go get that ring, right? And everybody kind of cheered, but at that moment, he wasn't really that good. And one of the things that you said was that you wanted those older guys to get there because you wanted them to have that experience of that championship, of competing at that highest level, of playing with those players in the championship round or in the championship game. So I guess a follow-up question for that would be, if they only got it because of that experience, does it still count as a championship in your mind? Does it still count as significant, I guess?
For me, probably not, to be honest, because did Gary Payton win a championship in my head? I don't remember him winning a championship. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He did, right?
Yeah.
And people are like, world champion Gary. And I don't remember that, because that was Dwayne Wade and Shaq's team, basically.
Yeah.
I don't remember that. So when a person goes, or Clyde Drexler even, I know people remember that he won a championship with the Rockets. But I don't really remember it like that. I remember it being Kenny Smith, Mario Elie, Robert Horry even. Hakeem obviously was the most important player on that team. And do I remember Clyde Drexler coming in at the second championship? Not particularly, even though I know it happened. So for me personally, in many cases, even if a person gets a championship, I don't remember it, but it's not for me to evaluate if a person's championship is valid or not. It's, I think, for something for them in their own head, you know?
Yeah.
How does Clyde Drexler feel about his own championship as compared to when he made the finals a couple years in the 90s, right? Like he took a team to the finals, I think 2 different times.
Yeah.
And in that case, they did something important. They made it to that level. They just didn't finish. And so do you feel like there's a difference, even say Patrick Ewing, right? Who made the finals, I think 2 different occasions, and they just didn't finish. So do you feel like if a player makes the finals and then they decide they need to ring chase essentially to get their championship, do you feel like that has an effect on how their championship is viewed for you?
Yeah. I think partially it does, right? Like, it's like no one can ever take away the title of champion from them, right? Like, they won a championship, right? But I feel like when we remember those great players, we remember them for their like top moments, right? Like when they were entertaining, when they were the leads, right? Like that's what we remember. And if it doesn't come in that moment, then it doesn't really feel that good. You know what I mean? Like for us, it's like, oh yeah, they got it. Congrats. They finally got that thing that they were after.
Yeah.
You got it. Good job. And then it's just like, whatever.
Yeah, on to the next thing, right? Because it's not that significant.
And that player won't be celebrated the same way as a champion as they would have if they would have won a championship for their team. You know what I mean? So that's one of the things to kind of think about. Like, it's almost weird because I feel like they would feel that same way as well, right? And they'd probably have the championship and then look back and be like, yeah, I got this ring. It's here. I won a championship. I can tell people that, but it's just a staple of something that I couldn't do by myself, you know what I mean? Or with my teams. Like, I had to go somewhere else to get it. It's just like, it's like a knockoff pair of Jordans, you know, like I got this knockoff ring. Like it's mine, but it's not really mine. Like it's whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They almost kind of seem like the Drakes of basketball. You know what I mean? Like they always wanted something when they were back in high school, never could get it. But now that they're older and people want to let them come to their team, they can finally get a ring. You know what I mean? Like Drake's like, you didn't know me back in high school, but now no new friends. What are you talking about, dude? Just whatever. But yeah, so I feel like that's one of the things with the players that are older, right? So it's like we view those as kind of like okay because they're trying to get it, right? But now I'm thinking about the younger guys, right? Because we talked about the older guys and thinking about the younger guys. One of the things that you said was that for these older guys, when they get it, the ring when they're old, we don't really think about it as much. So is it okay for these younger guys to start their ring chasing experience super early while they're in their prime or even before they get to their prime? When is the correct time? And is that even okay? Like, should that be something that should happen, or should they like try to like start their own legacy with a new team?
Right. Before we get into that, I want to say something so I don't forget. But a lot of the time, the value of a championship does go beyond sports. It goes beyond just the playing field, because when you're trying to get into the media, right? Your credentials, having a championship actually somehow makes you more credible, even if you're not articulate, even if you're not really knowledgeable. Yeah, having a championship makes you more credible. Everyone on ESPN now is some form of a champion in their sport, multiple champions, and even if they're role players or even if they were kind of important but not star players, they can always introduce them as Super Bowl champion, world champion, NBA champion,
right?
Yeah. So that always gives them credibility and it always makes them something that's, someone that's more easily sold to the public as an expert.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So sure. I think that there's also the value of that goes beyond what your current career is, because these guys only play sports for so long, but they can be in the media for a lot longer. John Madden, had he not won a Super Bowl as a coach, would not have had his announcing career, would not have had his video game career, which is more important and the thing he's known for the most, video games. Mm-hmm. So had he not been the John Madden champion coach and announcer, maybe he never even gets that opportunity to have a video game. And there's a really cool, I think, ESPN 30 for 30 about John Madden and the way he shaped the video game, which is I think anyone listening, if you can go find that, I think is a really cool story that I heard one day. So just before we talk about, the young guys, I just want to say that because championships matter. And getting back to the young guys before I give my take on it, I want you to talk about how you got onto this and the Victor Oladipo thing. And that'll give some context to kind of the entire conversation.
Cool. So this conversation all started because I read that there's reports that Victor Oladipo was trying to get out of Indianapolis, right? And for me, this is a story that sounds all too familiar. You had the situation with Paul George, right? The one that actually brought Victor Oladipo to Indianapolis, where he wanted to leave Indianapolis because he wanted to get a championship, right? Like that was the narrative at that time. Like Indy wasn't a place where he could win a championship, and he wanted to go somewhere where he could, right? So that was the first situation, and people took it as what it was. At that time, also, people were partially kind of tired of Paul George in Indianapolis because of how that whole situation went down, how he just let everything go to public. He had the baby. He also had some other situation where he said something super ridiculous. I probably watched it out of my brain because I wasn't trying to remember it. And it was kind of like, all right, now we're at another situation where another one of the key players that we were probably hoping to build with said that same thing, right? The one that we got in that trade. Well, I want to get some hardware. I want to get some rings, a lot of rings, right? Like that's what he basically said. He never said that he wanted to be out of Indy, but he did say he wanted rings. He wanted a lot of rings. He wanted to get some hardware, right? And a lot of people took that probably as he wants to get out of Indy, which he probably does, right? So for me, it came to that point of thinking a lot of these guys want rings, right? They want hardware, right? But just those words don't really mean much, right? It doesn't mean that they earned it, right? Like it doesn't mean that they were a contributor, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that they competed. It just means that they have a piece of hardware. And I feel like that narrative and the way that people say that is a dangerous thing, because now it gives that mindset that just because you change where you are, that you're going to be close to getting a ring, right? Or that if you stay in your current situation, that you won't be able to get a ring. And I feel like part of that takes away from the game, because there's certain guys that are just moving just to move. They're not even really making any significant change. And I was trying to see how that affected the game. So it should be an interesting story for the rest of this. So,
okay, so now we'll get back to what you were saying about young people chasing rings. And so I think from my point of view, I set it up earlier by saying that if a player had played for his entire career, worked on one team, tried really hard to win a championship and failed, then toward the end of his career, as you alluded to, when his skills have kind of declined, he's on the bench. And he's not contributing, but he's on the championship team. It might not mean a lot, but at least he got there, right? And those players that would win at the end of their careers were grateful just to have been in that position. And then now, I think it kind of speaks to what people feel about kind of our current generation and the generation after us, being that everything is so easy and there's a sense of entitlement that kind of changes how people work, and their work ethic is not quite there. And that's how it appears when you hear people that are in their fourth and fifth years talking about they need a championship for validation. And I say this because people used to be bound to one team. They were effectively owned by a team, right? And they even use that term, like a team owned their rights. And they would play for that team. And they were professionals. They played hard. They would get angry. They would request trade maybe, but they didn't have to be traded because your team owned your rights.
Yeah.
Now, with player movement being what it is, a player effectively can move every couple of years if he signs his contracts the right way. And so when the situation gets to the point where they don't want to be there anymore, there's nothing keeping them there. So a lot of the times the players don't dedicate themselves to the same team. They don't dedicate themselves to a city necessarily. They're just kind of wanting to go to wherever they want to be at that moment. And sometimes it's good. And sometimes it's just kind of based on the whims of a 25-year-old guy, which, anybody that's 25 years old, maybe they want to be somewhere one day and then maybe not so much the next. So I think there's kind of that little bit of being fickle, the little bit of you can get whatever you want and you're not actually appreciative of anything. So you don't really dedicate yourselves to anything. But there's also kind of the counterbalance when you say that of they are able to do that. So, should they be restricted to one team, right? There's all types of angles to look at it from. But for me, I think the reason why, the narrative started, say, we can go back farther to LeBron, actually. I think that's probably, of course, where a lot of the player movement starts. And when he was looked at as not being successful because in his 7th year, he hadn't won a championship.
Yeah, definitely.
With Cleveland. And so at that point, he went to make a move. And he to me, was one of the earliest players I could think of that actually, whether or not you call it ring chasing, started doing that. And he's actually been doing it ever since the 2010 decision that he made to be on the Miami Heat. So I think it's a complicated issue. Whatever I just said there, it just comes down to this complicated issue, because I think it just kind of shows where people's mind states are right now, that they're able to move, so they do it, so they basically get the media off their back. But who knows if it actually gets the monkey off their back, in a sense.
Yeah, that monkey off the back, right? And I feel like that was really well said. And one of the biggest takeaways that I can say from that one is that, as Shannon probably would say, the GOAT, right? Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, right? Because, like, I never thought about it in that context before, about the ring chasing. There was guys that I did it before LeBron, right? But LeBron's was so much more meaningful, right? Because you never saw a star, like a top player in the NBA, feel like he needed to move to get a championship. And I feel like that point was like, you know what? This is the best player in our league. He's doing it. So now it opens up the gates for everybody else to just, like, feel okay doing it, right? Like, if LeBron would have never did that, then it probably would have been viewed weird, because it would have been like, LeBron, like, you stayed with Cleveland, even though you lost all these championships and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, like, do this. And, like, then guys would probably feel bad. Like, yeah, you should probably stay with the same team, like that. But when LeBron did it, it kind of became more acceptable, and even though he took a lot of beef for it early on, right, I feel like it became more acceptable for guys to do that. He, like, led the way. And I feel like thinking about it that way shows the significance of LeBron's and his greatness, which, different conversation, right? But one of the other parts that I thought about with the young guys as well is partially similar to what you were talking about with the winning the championship for, like, a lot of those older players, right? A lot of these young guys in the NBA, right, one of the things that Victor said when he was saying, like, I want that ring, I want that chip, right? Like, I felt that maybe the pressure that the media puts on us, or that fans put on players to win a championship, is what's causing players to want to, like, go and win this championship, right? Like, it's like we think it's so high, right? Like, you look at Charles Barkley, doesn't have his championship, and every single player brings up Charles Barkley, right? Like, Charles Barkley has to be, like, mad. He probably wants to go back and join a team just to get a championship ring and say, now you can't use me as that example.
Yeah, unretire
anymore, right?
real quick. Yeah, unretire and just do it. Because how did he become the poster child for not having a championship? He got his team to a finals. You know what I mean? He balled out. He won an MVP award. Why is it not like John Stockton? Why is it not Karl Malone? Yeah. Why is Charles Barkley the one? There's a lot of players who are really good. I mean, Tracy McGrady didn't make it out of the first round until he joined the Spurs, right? And he lost in the finals that one year.
Yeah, and I feel like there's so many images of Charles Barkley that you see of just disappointment, right? And they just see him with this, and he's a loudmouth guy. Like, he didn't win his championships, although he was really good, really dominant. It's just, and I feel like a lot of players, they're just used to using him as an example. I don't even know if they know that much about Barkley's career at this point. Yeah. Like, some of those younger guys, you know what I mean? But I was going to say that I think that we do put a lot of pressure on them. And because of that pressure, they're like, we have to win this chip. and they don't really think about the significance of what it means. Like we said, as you get older and you win it, if it's you that's in the lead, cool. If you're jumping on someone else's team, then at a point it just kind of doesn't really seem to some as meaningful, right? And we had this conversation about some other stuff before. But the other part about it, I was just going to say that like those older players with the rings, these younger guys now have more marketability in these big cities, right? You haven't typically heard a lot of young guys that were in big cities be like, you know what, I want to be traded. And I feel like that's the other thing that a lot of these younger players are seeing is that it's not necessarily just about winning a championship. Some of that's partially a cover up just to say, I want to go to a big market so that I can make more money for myself. Yeah. And I feel like that's one of the things that's happening and it's not necessarily being talked about, right? You never saw Brandon Ingram. You never seen Lonzo Ball talking about, I'm trying to get traded from the Lakers.
Yeah. They were trying not to get traded hard.
They were trying not to get traded from the Lakers, right? Like, there's not people that are going from these teams. You may have heard Carmelo at some point do that, but he was like, I have a short list. Houston, LA, like
New York.
Like, I mean, that was it, right? Like, and when you think about like these different types of teams and stuff, it's really about young players investing in themselves, I think, more than it is just about that championship. That championship. I feel like they realize there's going to be a life after basketball, and maybe it's the financial advisors that are like, you need to get out of Indiana. There's not as much money in there. And if you can get to one of these big market teams, then you're good, and then we can talk about where we can take your level from there, So I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting point interesting connection that I didn't think of before. So
yeah, I think going back to the media point, the media is so reductive now that it actually becomes a little bit destructive to a player's mentality, in my opinion. If they listen to what the media says about them, they'll, first of all, if a person wins a championship with a team, it's only their championship. All we do is hear about big name stars that are winning championships, right? Mm-hmm. They never talk about the team's contribution. They never talk about who does what. It's always, KD won a championship, LeBron won a championship, James Harden will never win a championship, right? Without talking about all the players that are involved in that whole team. So it ends up where they take it on themselves to try to prove everyone wrong. And that's not how it should be, because no single player wins a championship by himself, because it's just impossible to do in the sport of basketball. In football, everything goes down to a quarterback. Russell Wilson, can he win a championship? Can he not win a championship? Can Matt Stafford win a championship? But organizations win championships.
Yeah.
Football especially, because it takes a lot of people coordinated on the same page to do anything in a football game, let alone an entire season and win a championship. So I think the media ends up, the way they now are reporting things and the way they're now portraying how sports work is as if only one person is involved in anything in the game. And I think it's destructive, and I think it's really negative. So that's one point, I think, and that's kind of what makes these players feel that desperate need to win, to shut everyone up. Although it'll never shut anyone up, because they'll just invent a new narrative that then changes things, and it's always moving the goalposts in the argument, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Another thing you said about lifestyle, and I think that's a really good point, because I was trying to look, and you'd brought up the whole idea of ring chasing, and I was trying to look and to see, okay, who's been doing this, and I searched for what people did in their compilations of ring chasers, if I could find a single person on the internet that might have compiled who he thought was ring chasers.
Yeah.
And it usually starts in the 90s, but if you look back in the 70s, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was on the Milwaukee Bucks. They drafted him, won a championship with the Milwaukee Bucks, won, finals MVP, I think, that year. And he won an MVP with them, I think, in his second year or something like that. So he already was a great player regardless, and he'd already been there. He won his championship. So he didn't really need to do anything extra. But he wanted to be traded to Los Angeles for lifestyle reasons. Yeah. And from what I read, it was either Los Angeles or New York, because he's from New York, but he played college and he kind of came of age in Los Angeles.
Yeah, UCLA.
So he wanted to be traded for lifestyle reasons. And Los Angeles, the Lakers actually at that time weren't any good. So it wasn't that same situation where it was like ring chasing, because they weren't that good when he got traded.
Yeah.
And then they became what they became after they got him, and they added a bunch of great players, including Magic Johnson. So that's one of the lifestyle reasons. Another one was Wilt Chamberlain also being traded to Los Angeles. And this was, I think this was the early 70s. So this is before Kareem was there, I think, right?
Yeah, I
And
believe so, yeah.
he had been playing with Philadelphia, and he wanted to go to LA for lifestyle reasons as well. And his LA team, I can't remember if it was good or not. I think it was probably in better shape than Kareem's. I have to go and check on it. But he wanted to be traded for lifestyle reasons too, so he was traded. But both of these players were traded. They didn't move in free agency because that wasn't a thing back then. And they took whatever the team was, right? It wasn't like, well, this team isn't good, I'm not going to go there. They went there for a particular reason, and they worked hard to play well on the team. And they both ended up winning championships in LA. But those are the two examples that I looked at that I thought were interesting because they were both for lifestyle reasons. And I think that's a great point. It's always been that way. People want to be in places that are more amenable to living, a happy life where you don't have to be freezing all the time in the winter or whatever the case is. So so for that, it makes perfect sense. And for the whole media thing, that's something that I think a player needs to he has to learn to ignore, because if the media dictates all their actions, then they're never going to be living the type of lifestyle they want and playing the career that they want, because they're always going to be doing something out of kind of reaction, and then living in a reactionary way.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good point, right? Because like the media, they do control a lot of what goes on in basketball. And with those guys that you mentioned, they did it for lifestyle, but they did it for, I feel like, almost different lifestyle reasons, right? Like Wilt was just a playboy, right? Like Wilt was like, I'm ready to go to the West Coast, have a good time, party it up, right?
Yeah.
I feel like I could barely ever see those two in the room trying to go to the same club. You know what I mean? Like Kareem is more activist type mindset, right? And if you guys didn't know, Kareem actually still writes articles. You can find some of them on The Guardian. He has a lot of really good articles on there, so check those out. But anyways, they came there for a lot of different type of lifestyle reasons. You know what I mean? And their situations were so different. And now I feel like the NBA is coming back to that main idea, right? I feel like the NBA is full of guys that are all chasing this like rainbow, and they all feel like they have the path to get to the rainbow. But like, there is no specific path. The path to the rainbow always changes. It depends on where the pot is, and that pot changes locations. And I feel like that's the thing, is that a lot of these guys are just saying, you know what, I'm at this location right now and this pot can never exist here. And then what happens, So it was kind of interesting because I wanted to try to think about teams where players left and then the teams actually ended up doing a little bit better, right? But I also didn't see a bunch of situations where a player left and the team that they went to was always better than the team that they left, or ended up getting them that championship that they were trying to get. And I feel like that's one of the things that's not talked about. There's a lot of guys that leave, have situations with their career where it doesn't end up going the way that they were because they're either not the man, or just because they didn't fit that system anymore, or their skills declined, or there was some type of comfortability that was going on with them. So
what teams were you thinking about? What players?
Well, one of the ones that you saw was Dwight Howard, right? Dwight Howard left trying to chase these championships and didn't necessarily work out for him. Paul George has had that same type of situation, right? I was trying to think about Blake Griffin. I couldn't remember the reason why he was trying to get out. I couldn't remember if it was money or not. Anthony Davis
he got traded.
He got traded. Okay, Anthony Davis is actually looking pretty well for him. You know what I mean? But again, like, I feel like the more that this goes on, the more we're going to start seeing more and more guys that are going to different teams and it's not necessarily working out, right?
Well, what I think the good thing about it, or what you said that was a really good point, was these guys, if they leave, if they're trying to be the man, then they probably won't have that much success. If they know that they play a role, then it'll work out better. Because I think what it shows, and we're talking about NBA specifically, I think what it shows is that there are a lot of good players, but there are only so many great players.
Exactly.
Because when you consider what you would consider a great player is a player that can go on any team and make them a contender. And right now, it's probably only LeBron right now in the NBA I could think of. I don't know if there's any other team or any other player that can leave a team and then make the new one a contender. And of course, there's caveats to that because LeBron refuses to play for a team that isn't stacked anymore. And that's why I said he's been basically chasing rings ever since 2010 because he refuses to play for a bad team ever again. He refuses to be the one who's basically keeping the team afloat. So there's an asterisk involved in that too. But you have every team in the NBA that doesn't have LeBron has a best player on it. And I think when they leave, then you can see how good that player actually is. Yeah, Paul George was the best player on his team. And Paul George is a really, really good player. But Paul George isn't the player that is the best player on a championship team. If we ask about Kawhi Leonard, now I think things are kind of up in the air because Kawhi also had a situation where he wanted to leave a team and go to a place that suited his lifestyle more. Is it chasing championships? Probably. But I think it was probably more of a lifestyle thing than anything.
Yeah, for sure.
And so when he got traded to Toronto and they won the championship, people, hailed Kawhi as being the man now. He won the finals MVP. He made that shot in Game 7 against Philly that won the series. He had a lot of great moments and he came up big. But also the Raptors have one of the best coaches in the NBA, as a lot of people consider. They have a great team. They have one of the best executives in Masai Ujiri. So that was a really good situation for him to be in. So now when they're now he's in LA with the Clippers and they lose in the second round and blow a 3-1 lead, the questions are, is he great, right? So I think the chasing championship thing can actually let you know, it can help kind of figure out who's good, who's not. Even though this year is different, it's weird.
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense. It's really weird. And you would think that people should be given a do-over kind of, but with the urgency that people have now as far as everything in sports, there is no second chance for Doc to do this again with his team.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, was he a true number one? Or is there only really one player in the NBA right now that can take a team from being okay to being a championship level team?
Yeah, and man, so many good points right there. I did want to say this one thing about Doc because I wanted to bring that into the conversation of championship chasing as well, right? There's a lot of teams that are in the mindset of championship chasing as well. It's not necessarily just players. And this is one of the things that teams do is that they might be quick to trade a player. They may be quick to let go of a coach, right? So I definitely want to have that conversation. We can come back to that one maybe after we talk about the player part and then just add that on there at the end. But I definitely think that that's an interesting thought with this season as well as like the coaching relationship to championship chasing as well. So
I want to get to the heart of the matter here really quick.
Yes, let's go.
All right, I'm going to give you a couple players. I'm going to give you at least two. I'll give you Kevin Durant. I'll give you LeBron James. And I want you to compare the number of championships that they both have in your head. I just want you to tell me, because both of these guys can be accused of what you call championship chasing or ring chasing, right? They can be accused of that. So how many championships does each of those players have in your head?
Katie has, what, 2 or 1? 2? And LeBron has 1, 2, 3. He has what, 3?
Yeah. So I mean, KD 1, 2, LeBron 1, 3. But my question is, when they did what they had to do to get those championships, are those championships all 100% valid to you in both cases?
I like where this question's going. So let me think about this because I'm trying to get out of my own mental mindset that I have set for him already.
No, that's cool. I want to hear that. I want to hear your mindset. Yeah.
because I feel like my mental mindset is that like I view these players differently initially, so I feel like that plays into it. And I feel like for me, the LeBron ones, I feel like they're a little bit more justified for me personally than I feel like the KD ones were. And I don't know, KD has 2 championships, and I feel like as times change, 20, 30 years from now, the NBA will be totally different. And this conversation will be not even relatable because at that point, like, we won't even think about it. We'll just be like, KD is a 3-time NBA champion, right? LeBron, this many year champion. So I don't know. I feel like initially I would take it as something totally different, but that's just because we don't think about how many times people finish second or what they did to get in the championships later on in their career. So yeah, I don't know, man. That's an interesting question for me.
So the reason I asked that, because I feel like that is actually the question at the heart of this argument. And it's not just for those two guys, but for any player that a person feels jumped on a team to win a championship. So, for KD, a lot of people didn't like that he went to a ready-made champion that had won 73 games the year before.
Yeah.
And of course, the team was a little different. The depth of the team decreased year by year that he was there. So things were different, and people don't like to put that in context, but they'll just say, oh, they won 73 games. But that was a different team. There was a different style.
Yeah.
All that stuff. So some people don't validate any of those championships that KD won because of the idea that he chased those championships, right? And even KD said that he didn't get the same fulfillment out of winning that he thought he would. I think he probably felt a little empty because the validation that he thought he was going to get because of the coronation that he thought he was going to get from the media,
Yeah.
And look at LeBron. LeBron left Cleveland to go to Miami because he and his best friend D Wade and another good friend of theirs, Chris Bosh, could win a championship. And it might have been Melo if Melo would have wanted less money or whatever.
Thank you, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, either way they were gonna come together, right? 3 people were gonna come together. They had seen what Boston did, and they decided this is a way to win a championship because he wanted that championship. And so after he won those 2 championships, and I don't feel like he got the credit he thought he was going to get. I don't feel like he got the praise he wanted. So he went back to Cleveland because he started telling people that championship counted for 2 championships. So in his mind, he's got 4 championships because of the Cleveland championship, which of course you can't win twice in a year. Come on. I don't know how they're going to do. Yeah, there's no way you're going to win 2 championships in a year. I was like, even after the pandemic, I was trying to figure out the pandemic would be able to,
Yeah,
either way.
At the end of this year, they started up real quick, and then it's like, nah.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's not happening. So, even he knew that he wasn't getting the validation he wanted. Yeah. And then when he went to LA for lifestyle reasons, he still ain't going to play on a bad team. He still wanted to get Anthony Davis. And I'm sorry, Anthony Davis, like I said, he's got to be the best player on the team for them to win. They're probably going to win. Anthony Davis is probably going to get Finals MVP, and nobody's going to think that it was good because Anthony Davis had his own team and him being the best player on the team. They didn't make it out of the second round of the playoffs. So in that case, do people count that as a championship? He's going to tell people he won. LeBron's going to say he's got 4 or 5 now, I guess. But either way, it's not the same, right? It's not the same as earning it. And that's funny because this actually goes back to our fandom thing too. As loyal as a fan wants their players to be just as loyal and suffer. They want the player to suffer the way that they suffer. And when the player wins a championship and he suffered through it, everybody gets validated at the same time. And there was no question, right? The media give it a checkbox. The media say that's a real championship. The fans say that's a real championship. And when those things don't align, then it's not a real championship in somebody's mind. And then I think that's when a player can get a little flustered and figure out what he's got to do to make that championship valid.
Yeah, and I honestly had a couple other things, but I'm going to jump right onto this boat because I thought that was actually an interesting point. I realized that LeBron James, he really cares about the regular season MVP. Finals MVP, he doesn't really care about. He's had his chance, you know what I mean? So I feel like he realizes that when he won those championships when they were in Miami, and I'll come back to that, even though they built a team there and they won them together, it didn't feel like his own. And he realized that other people didn't view it as feeling like LeBron's championship. And I feel like he's trying to make AD more relevant to this team so that it feels like AD, like a guy that looked up to LeBron as a mentor, as like a role model, now has that same feeling that he's experienced. Because, yeah, LeBron probably was like, man, like I won these things in Miami, but like there's unfinished business. Like I don't feel whole. You know what I mean? And I feel like once he won that championship back in Cleveland, he felt a lot more whole. And he was like, I don't need to stay around here. Like I did my due. Like I'm good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's interesting because like I do feel Anthony Davis being pushed along by LeBron to like be the most important player on the team, like have that leadership role, like whether he needs to be it or not. Like I feel like LeBron is like trying to like push him down that road because he knows about that championship experience and like making sure that AD has that if they win. But I think that part is really interesting. And I think that it'd also be interesting to see if AD does win a championship with the Lakers, would there ever be a chance that he would go back to New Orleans to try to win a championship with all the guys that they have? Like 5 years down the line, is there any chance that he goes back and tries to be a free agent and joins on to one of their championship runs? That'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, I'm going to comment on that really quick because what I see from Anthony Davis is a team player. Anthony Davis can do whatever a team needs, and he's gotten just so good in the NBA. His shot is automatic from pretty much anywhere.
Yeah,
it's actually
wow.
Really impressive, right? To see like he's that good now.
His spot, yeah.
He doesn't have that mentality to lead the team, to be the alpha on the team, I don't think. So do I see him going back to New Orleans? No, because there's no point. Because if he's happy with his life in LA, he's not going to leave. He's not going to Chicago to win a championship for his hometown. I don't see that either. I see him kind of going with the flow. That's what I see him as. So I think that he's going to stay there. You know, if LeBron were to retire in 2 years, it'll just be Anthony Davis and the Lakers, and that'll be it. And he'll play there until they don't want him or he wants to leave or whatever. But I don't see him causing a fuss. I don't see him doing the same things as asking for the roster to be upgraded or anything. I just see them being whatever they were in New Orleans. He'll be the same player, except he'll have that championship with him. It's actually a lot like Wilt Chamberlain, since we brought him up, before about his, reasoning for going to LA. Wilt Chamberlain was a supreme athlete, unlike almost any athlete that's ever played sports. But he didn't care about winning as much as he cared about enjoying himself.
Yeah, exactly.
So he put up numbers because he liked to play, and he played all game long. He'll play a 48-minute game. He'll play all that, and he'll play overtime. That's fine. But when it comes down to it, if he's going to be the guy that pushes people to get better and win, he's not that guy, right? He was never that guy. And that was just, he knew who he was, and he wasn't the guy that made people play harder and pushed people, because he just wanted to have fun and enjoy himself. So I think that's a lot like Anthony Davis is, in terms of he likes playing the game. He's really good at the game, but I don't see him having that extra little bit of fight, that thing that makes you a jerk to your teammates, I don't see him having that.
Yeah, I say that I wouldn't see him leaving LA for the most part. Like Anthony Davis is still really young, you know what I mean? NBA wise, with how long guys are playing in the league and with his skill set, like maybe he's not like a down low post, big body guy. Maybe he becomes that stretch four, like LaMarcus Aldridge type guy at the end. You know what I mean? Like maybe he simplifies his game. But again, I feel like after this year, he's going to be a champion. So he's like, I'm in LA, I'm a champion. Like life's good. I'm fine. You know what I mean? The media is probably going to have stuff to say, you know what I mean? But I feel like if they win one more championship in LA, it'll probably feel a little bit more like it was his, just because now they started building a team around LeBron and Anthony Davis. And I think the reason why I thought that was kind of interesting thing was because you asked me that question earlier, and I wasn't really sure how I would think about it with comparing KD and LeBron. And now I'm thinking about it and having the time, I feel like the thing that struck most people, at least for me, and what I imagine most people with KD compared to LeBron, is that it felt like in Miami, when they did it, they were trying to build something, right? Like they were building a team. They were bringing different pieces, putting them together and seeing what happened and hoping that grouping of players could win a championship. And that's what they did in Miami. And I feel like when KD did it, he wasn't a part of the building process. He was just an addition. And that's how he kind of felt. That's just like an addition for a lot of people. Like he just got this championship as an additional piece, not as a building piece. And I feel like that's the thing. Like a lot of players probably don't feel like core pieces when they're just the building piece compared to, an addition to a building piece. And that's why I feel like AD is kind of like in the middle of that, because when KD joined the Warriors, did they really need him? I don't know. When LeBron joined Miami, did they need him to win a championship? Yeah. Like if you would have had Wade and Bosh there, they wouldn't have got it done. So I feel like that was the difference with those two types of situations. So I definitely think that part's interesting. And I definitely think that if the Lakers do win this championship, it'll be interesting to see how the media kind of like paints this win for LeBron, for KD, and shoot, even for Frank Vogel after being kicked out as the Pacers coach after doing good, just like Nate McMillan. So that should be interesting.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of I get the analogy you're making there, in that, but I do feel like with the Heat, if they were building something, it was like IKEA furniture. I feel like it was already pre-assembled, essentially, already ready to assemble pretty easily. And, you know, we can differ on that, where it's like the Warriors, we knew they won a championship, sure, but you knew if three of the top 10 players in the league at the time were on the same team, all they had to do was fill in the blanks and then they could win. And they won immediately, not the championship, but, you know, they won 2 out of 4, which they probably could have won all 4, you know, like they were already immediately better than everyone else in their conference and probably could have won at least 3 championships together. But I do think that it's all in how you look at it, because you know why they got together. They got together to win championships. They didn't come together to experiment. The same way that in Boston, when those 3 players got traded there, Boston was trying to win a championship, knowing that if they had 3 players who were really good players at the same time, they'd have a really good shot. And, you know, the difference being, did Miami need LeBron to win a championship? Yes, but did he need to go to Miami to win a championship? Why did Miami need to win a championship? You know what I'm saying? Of course, the Warriors didn't need KD to win a championship because they already won, but they had already built their team. Miami didn't build their team the same way, say, Golden State built their team, or say, you know, the Bulls built their team, or the bad boy Pistons built their team. Those types of things. Like, did they build their team as much as they paid for their team to come together to win? So, you know,
go ahead.
That's a part of the whole conversation in terms of ring chasing, because to me, that was still ring chasing. It was just ring chasing done in a way that hadn't been done before. Yeah. But it's still ring chasing.
Yeah. And I think that that's the difference, right? Like what we're starting to see is that ring chasing kind of like depends on, for me at least, like what is your situation, right? Do you have a valid case to leave the team that you're with to go after a ring? Right. Because there's some people that think the situation is going to be better, right? Like that they're the missing piece or something. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's the thing. Like, you know what? The missing piece for me winning a championship is going to a different team. And that's not really what it is. Your team still has a chance, but maybe there's something different that you can do. Maybe you can develop your team. Chemistry goes very far as well as just talent. And we're seeing that right now with the Miami Heat team, right? Maybe they're not going to win the championship. They have a lot of talent as well, but their chemistry, like I haven't seen a team work together and flow together and communicate and be there at the right times like the Miami Heat has done since they've gotten to the bubble. And that's a huge thing as well. And I feel like that's one of the things that we talk about with these teams that are being built, for me, is that when you talk about the Miami Heat and them being built, well, all right, like, maybe it could work out. Like maybe it couldn't. Like maybe those 3 types of personalities don't really work. You had Dwayne Wade, who was a slasher. He played down low. He had the ball a lot. He kicked it out to guys. You had LeBron James, same type of like mindset as how he played, right? They weren't necessarily 3-point shooters. That's two of your guys basically take up the paint. Bosch, he takes up the paint, but also he has like his little like 3-point range, sometimes a shot or his mid-range shot. Okay, cool. So now you really have to start developing that team and building it. So I feel like that process to me kind of felt more like a build because they weren't necessarily sure how it was going to turn out. It was more of an experiment. And it was like, we're going to try to see what happens when we bring all these pieces together. And it hadn't been done before. It wasn't something where you saw top guys that were close to their prime or in their prime joining the same team through like free agency. And it was kind of interesting at that point because it was like, can this actually work? And then, like I said, I feel like that's the difference with that one compared to the other situation because they basically already had a game plan. They already knew how the pieces fit together. They already had the chemistry, and he just dropped in, and it's like, all right, cool. We have one new player. Like, let's try to figure out how this chemistry is going to work with that. But to go from 3 players that are stars on their team, trying to figure out how to work together, what things are you going to have to step away from, what things you're going to have to come back to, make all that work compared to just adding one superstar doesn't seem as big of a build or as big of a deal to me. So
to me, when I look at it, you heard D Wade say that they had a chance to go to Chicago, but Chicago didn't have enough max player slots.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't going to just try to only be D Wade and LeBron. I think they were talking about possibly playing with D Rose too, but they wanted the 3 max player slots because they wanted to have that extra person. It wasn't like, oh, we're just going to do what it takes and we'll build from there. They had an idea that they wanted a third person. Like it was
always going to be those 3 though. They were always going to have to be in a building process. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. But it wasn't building as much as it was that they knew they were going to be together and they knew they were going to be good and they just needed complementary parts around them.
No, it has a lot to do with building because
I don't feel like it's that much different because when you think about Golden State, it was already a puzzle, right? You said they had their chemistry and everything. Now you put an extra puzzle piece onto a completed puzzle. How do we fit that in? We didn't know if it was going to work. Obviously, they were great players and you had an idea that they were going to be able to make it work. But it's not any different to me because you still have something that he could have completely disrupted the chemistry. Like you said, chemistry being so important. The Heat players, the big 3 of the Heat that liked each other and already knew that they had chemistry on the court, that was there. You think that the chemistry would, I think the chemistry was different in terms of having to even build chemistry. And you saw the reason why the Warriors kind of fell apart at the end, aside from injury, was there was conflicts. Now, Draymond and KD, for some reason, didn't want to get along. There was just a lot of chemistry issues toward the end that made it not enjoyable for them to play together. So I don't think it was just as cut and dry as one situation was better than the other, because I think that you're overlooking kind of how easy it was for the Heat as compared to the Warriors.
Not in that sense, because like I feel like with KD, they could have literally set KD on the bench and they still would have had the team that went to the Western Conference Championship and won the championship, right? Like they could have still set KD on the bench and still had that same exact team, and he could have won a championship possibly by sitting on the bench. So they didn't necessarily have to figure him out all the way in that same type of sense. And that's what I'm saying. That team was already made up. Like they already were really good championship favorites, and him just coming along, like it's like, all right, cool, you have to fit them in, but it's not as hard to fit in one puzzle piece when you know how the puzzle's going to look when it's aligned. And the Heat, they had no idea how the puzzle was going to look when it was aligned. They had these pieces, but they didn't know what it was going to look like when they put them all together because they all came from a bunch of 3 different types of puzzles compared to just adding one puzzle piece in. And not only did they have to add them in, they had to build the players that were around them. So even if they went to Chicago, right, even if they had those 3 people, you have now D Rose, LeBron, and D Wade that are slashing interior players that like the ball in their hands that can pass. There's still conflict with those 3 players and trying to make that work and trying to go throughout the season and trying to build that chemistry and make sure that players play their roles and make sure that everybody's happy. That's a huge task to take on. That's not the same as what the Warriors had to do with KD. And that's just like getting rid of basically everybody in your team that had a chemistry and then basically bringing on everybody. When they brought on LeBron and Bosh, like I think they had like 5 or 6 players on their active roster at that time, and they had to fill in all of those spots. So
yeah, but you can find guys that fit. You can find guys that fit well in terms of the chemistry and in terms of their role on the court. So it's easy when you have to start over.
But
if
again,
you find the right guys to do it, and everybody was trying to take the league minimum.
But
people were taking the league minimum to be there.
But that wasn't what was going on then.
Because it was just actually more like a conference, like a congregation of ring chasers that all went down there to the same point. Shane Battier came down there.
Shaq,
Mike, hold up, who was there? I don't want to say Jason Williams because I feel like he was on the 06 team.
Mike Miller was there.
Mike Miller, or Mike Bibby too. Wasn't he?
Mike Bibby.
Randomly, just people. Yeah. So I got people a lot. It was just like a destination place for ring chasers at that point. So I feel like everybody was willing to take the minimum to be part of it because they all saw that it was special and it was something that could get them a championship. But I think for when you think about what the Warriors went through, they just lost the championship because they felt like they didn't have a go-to scorer when they needed it, especially in the mid-range. And KD filled that split that responsibility that they had because they said it themselves. They wanted someone to make sure that they can go get a basket because they had trouble scoring when the game was slowing down and the game was in the half court. And the Cleveland did that thing where they determine the tempo of the game and they take control of the tempo. And you saw it when KD was there. When they played in the finals, they didn't have problems scoring. I mean, it was a 5-game series and then a 4-game series the next, and it could have easily been longer, but Golden State took it over because KD took over. I think that had he not been there, it would have been different because you don't think that Cleveland figured out how to play Golden State, how to get tough with them, how to intimidate Steph. I think they did. So I think it was important. And in both cases, it was people chasing rings in their prime. It was, but I don't feel like it was that much different. It was built differently, but I don't feel like you can take away credit from one situation while giving credit to the other situation just because you liked how it was built.
Yeah. So my thought with that is that that's a cop out. First of all, to say that your mid-range game is not there, you don't have a go-to scorer, so you have to get KD, Kevin Durant, out of all players. That is ridiculous. That makes no sense. And for him to say, okay, my role is to come on the championship team and score mid-range points to be a go-to scorer at those times. And of course, that's probably why he wouldn't feel like his championship meant much because he took on the role that any player could have taken and they would have still won that championship. And maybe that's a better way to kind of think about the whole Golden State Warrior thing. They didn't necessarily need KD to fill that role to win a championship.
So that could have been Rudy Gay?
Yeah. Yeah, they could have put Rudy Gay. They could have put Rudy Gay, yeah. Yeah, they could have put Rudy Gay in there and they still would have won that. Because they didn't necessarily win the championship just with Kevin Durant. They won it with their second team. They won it with the other starters. They won it with all the guys that they had last season. So that's the thing, is that Kevin Durant came onto a team to be a mid-range scoring whatever. Did he add other stuff? Yeah. Did they need it? No. That's the point. It's like all those other teams. Say if KD would have went to Orlando, if he would have went to New York, if he would have went to New York and they would have built up a process and he would have been like that player on New York, everybody would have supported KD. They would have been like, yeah, you won a championship. You brought a championship to New York. You did this. It was your team, you and you else you brought up there or whatever. And I feel like people would have been okay with that because they understood that this was a process that KD went through. And I think just like that thing that we talk about with fandom and saying that for a lot of fan experience to have with the player is because they go on these journeys with these players, right? KD winning a championship. What journey did most fans of KD's go on? It's like, oh, yeah, he left his team to join a team that won, and now he got a championship. That was his journey.
He had a journey a long way in the NBA to that point, from being on the Supersonics to being
talking about
OKC.
that. I'm just talking about his
But that's
journey.
their journey. That's the KD fans' journey.
But that's not your journey for KD. And with respect to a lot of NBA fans, right? Your journey is representative of your highest point, right? And that's kind of like the peak of your journey for a lot of guys. And that's probably why Barkley keeps getting used as that example, because they're like, wow, this is like the peak of Barkley's journey. And he got so disappointed because he can do this. And they just remembered that mindset. And it was a very real image that's able to be seen all the time. He's always on TV. He's always talking about somebody. You could be Charles Barkley. You could be that person that everybody sees, and they realize that he doesn't have a championship. So,
yeah, but here's my issue is that I think we both have to agree that KD went for a championship and he chased the ring. LeBron also chased the ring. They're the same act. Whether or not you do it differently, it's the same act. LeBron left his team to go to somewhere, anywhere that could help him win a championship. He had options, but he was going to make sure that wherever he was going to be the same group of people around him, because he didn't want to be he didn't want to be in Cleveland. First of all, that was a lifestyle.
Nobody
choice
wants to be in Cleveland.
But still, it was a lifestyle choice that he didn't want to be in Cleveland. And he also didn't want to have a bad team. He wanted to have a team that made it easier for him. So he wanted to do things easier while still winning and also getting the glory for being the best player on a team. And the difference between what he did and what KD did, to me, negligible, especially since, as we said, what LeBron did was actually influence the rest of the NBA because he made that okay. He validated that decision. So anyone who thinks that they deserve a championship or doesn't want to hear the media hound them about not winning can do that, and it's perfectly valid. So for all the things that LeBron has done, that's one of the things that is the most influential. I'm sure they're going to find ways to change that, or maybe people won't do that as much anymore. But for the foreseeable future, that's his, in my opinion, lasting impact on the NBA.
Yeah, I think, like I said, like I feel like we always have like different ideas or like points or thoughts that we can make for that. Like I could state maybe KD should be thankful that the Warriors brought him on. Like they didn't have to bring on KD to win that championship, so maybe he should be thankful. Maybe that's why he doesnment feel like it was his, because he didn't have to play that role. Like I feel like that's the thing. It's like LeBron didn't have to be thankful.
They asked him, right?
But this is what I'm saying. Like in this sense, right? Like he should be thankful that they asked him, because they didn't have to ask him. They could have asked a bunch of different players, right? Like I feel like what the Warriors were doing, it wasn't even about KD and them needing him. Their thought was, all right, we're going to bring on KD because we know that Clay and Draymond are going to be free agents pretty soon. So at least if we can have like KD here, maybe we can keep the 4 of those. I feel like that's the only reason why he was with the Warriors from the Warriors standpoint of view. Like as far as winning the championship, like of course it'd be nice to have him there to do that because you have this other resource, but at the end of the day, I feel like it was more of a business decision to bring him on than anything else. And KD was just like, yeah, I'll play for you guys. Maybe you guys can keep me around. And they were like, all right, cool. Honestly, like I don't think it was that deep of a situation for them. Like I think that the whole situation with Boston, I think that was different. I think Miami situation.
Why was Boston different?
Again, Boston, they use their resources, traded to get these people, and then they started pulling together a team, and they built a team that way. Also, when you're talking about the league minimum and like players taking the league minimum, stuff like that, like when LeBron, Bosh, and Wade were putting together that team, like initially they didn't know which all players they would be able to get for the league minimum. They didn't know who would necessarily take that, right? But after they did that, then they had to like figure out which players would take the league minimum, and like building a team by convincing a lot of these veterans to take the league minimum that still have a lot left with the thought of a championship. Like a lot of teams hadn't been able to do that before. So that's why I feel like this situation is totally different, because when you think about what the Heat did, it was building together something. It was actually like doing something that hadn't really been done. It was kind of creative in that sense. And with the whole KD thing, like it didn't seem, maybe that's my thing. Maybe I'm just a fan of the game, and it just didn't seem fascinating. It seemed like a cop out. It didn't seem like it did justice to the game. It just seemed like a bailout, honestly. So maybe, like I said, maybe it's just more of me. I'm willing to accept that if that's the situation, that it's just more of me and just not liking the way that it felt to me. It just didn't feel smooth. It didn't go over right. It's like eating a bad steak that's like super dry and well done. It's like, just didn't feel right. It's like I was excited, and now it's just like I don't even want to think about that anymore, you know? So
Yeah, and maybe that's it, because when you look at the players that were on the Heat versus the players that were on Golden State, I mean, D Wade was a former Finals MVP, could have been an MVP, so maybe he and Steph cancel each other out. I don't feel like Chris Bosh and Clay. I feel like Chris Bosh was a much more what do I want to say? He had accomplished more, much more accomplished player than Clay at that point.
yeah,
And as far as like Draymond, I mean, Draymond's good in the system. So you could definitely find a player that can do the things that Draymond did.
yeah,
And, when they got Ray Allen, you could say maybe that was even a wash because of that type of a talent versus other. I don't feel like they were actually that different because,
like
in order
chemistry.
to
Think
make,
about chemistry though. The chemistry is
yeah,
the
yeah,
different part.
yeah, the chemistry was there. But I think in order to make KD look worse, they always, they try to elevate other players, which is to tear someone down, you elevate other people kind of thing.
Oh yeah,
And I think they did that a lot by saying, oh, now the Warriors had 3 Hall of Famers. Somehow Draymond Green, if Draymond Green's a Hall of Famer, he's a Hall of Famer the way that Dwight Howard is. But Dwight Howard was a more accomplished player also, right? You just can't say that just because you want to say it. You got to have something to back it up. And Draymond Green, his story has to be finished written before we know what he actually is,
yeah,
But we know that if you took him out on another team, Draymond Green's not going to be a first team All NBA player on another
nope.
team. He's not going to be nearly as effective on another team because of the system that they run and his perfect fit in that system. And I think Boston is different, definitely. And the reason why Boston is different, I think, is because Boston did it the way that every other team had done it so far up to that point. They made trades. They figured out how to get other teams to give them players that maybe those teams gave up on, but they knew could contribute really well. I mean, and they use the term super team all the time now, and they didn't use that until recently. But to have like 3 All NBA players on the same team had been done before. The Celtics, the old '60s Celtics had that situation. The '80s Celtics had it. The '80s Lakers had it. The Bulls essentially had it. So any great dynasty basically was a super team at some point.
Yeah.
So, you have those things, but you do it through the draft and through trading and maybe through free agency, but that's, it wasn't as big of a deal back then. You wouldn't let your best players get away in free agency. So anyway, I think, a lot of those players that went over and got traded and things like that contributed to teams that were called super teams. But, because they didn't do it through free agency, people look at it differently.
Yeah. Yeah. I see what you're basically saying like teams were just like built differently. And I think that if you think about it that way with saying like teams were built differently, right, then I feel like that's kind of like that same thing that I was thinking about with LeBron and them. It's like maybe that's the thing is that like you're just going at it's a different way to build a super team, right? Like you can build a super team by just bringing superstars together, or you can build a super team that's that's where I keep coming to the problem is that like you can build a super team that didn't exist, but you can't build a super team that was already there. You can only make them Super Saiyan, right? Like super Saiyan, right? Like they're.
But what I think you're doing is you're trying to qualify that a team has to be built. And I don't think that that's a requirement. I think a team is what it is. Why do you have to build it from nothing?
So I'm saying is that when our conversation is about chasing championships, right? And we're talking about players' experiences while they chase those specific types of championships and how they are viewed by some of the players afterwards, as well as how they're viewed by fans. And also thinking about how fans feel about these specific experiences with players as they get or when they reflect on their career, right? And one of the things that we're stating is that for me, there was a significance of LeBron going down to Miami. And there was something that, like you said, something that was special that was brewing down there and people wanted to be a part of. Before that moment, like Miami had won before, like the kind of their viewership, whatever, like fandom was like not as high as what it was. But it's still okay, right? Like they're not making the playoffs and not really dominating whatever. Like they made it sometimes, but like not all the time. But the biggest thing was that at that moment, now they started to build something, right? And they actually built something And to me, as a fan watching the game, that was interesting. And to me, that building of something felt like they earned it because they started to build it, right? Whatever way that they like started to build it, it was something that didn't necessarily exist before. And now it exists as a staple that can be added upon to get to that level. But I felt like with the Warriors, right, they already had a base. They already had something that was already built. And then somebody just came over. It's like you doing all of the experimentation for a research project. And then there's a really good guy from a postdoc that comes in, another postdoc. He comes and does like a little bit of experiment when you didn't need him to, and you could have had an undergraduate do that. And now he gets credit for this whole paper when he's already a huge name. It's like, well, he didn't really do much. Like, I didn't really need him there. Like, he didn't really build this project. He just did an experiment. Like, I didn't really need him there. And I feel like for that postdoc to be like, yeah, I claimed this paper off of like what I really didn't do too much of. I just kind of like jumped on. And it's kind of like, right? Like, it doesn't really leave that meaningful of experience with that specific paper with respect to that postdoc. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it a little bit more in my mind compared to anything else.
What I think is like, let's say you buy a house for $5 million and you got to renovate it, but you can sell it for 10, right? Like I think that's what you're thinking, that the Warriors were a $5 million house mansion and they were already pristine and beautiful, but the Warriors organization didn't want to settle, and they didn't want their team to just be a $5 million mansion. They want their team to be a $10 million mansion. They want their team to be a $15 million mansion. Whereas what the Miami Heat did, in your opinion, was they found a plot of land and they built a team, right? But they built a $5 million mansion. They just built the team rather than.
Well, are you talking about the business part of it, or just the team like winning part of it?
The team winning part of it. I'm saying that the team itself, as a team, like,
I feel like it's a difference because it can be capped in that sense. Like, you can cap it at a championship compared to capping it at financial wise.
Right. So like, what I mean is, you know, if you have this nice thing, the Warriors was a nice thing that was already good and already valuable and already something you could be proud of. But you never want to just rest on your laurels and say, I've done enough. Right. And they didn't want to just be, and this goes to now talking about organizations chasing championships. So this was a move that the organization wanted to do also, that made their team better, made their team more valuable, made their team look better. So now it's not just not just that $5 million mansion, like I'm saying. They renovated it. They said, hey, instead of these like wood floors, let's put in some KD tiles. Let's heated now. It's heated KD tiles or whatever. And now everyone's like, wow, that house is actually even better than it was before.
Sounds like a bored rich person to me, man. It sounds like a bored rich person.
Well, that's what it is. I mean, when you've been that successful, in order to be a billionaire, you don't want to just be second place. You want to be first, and you want to be first by a mile. That's just how it goes. And so, like, you know, you take your shower. Now it's not just like a regular shower with a regular head. Now it's one of those steam showers, right? Because we could get another free agent that is now a steam shower or whatever. You're just thinking about adding stuff to it. And the Miami Heat, where they just might not have had a house there, but they had the blueprints drawn for a $5 million mansion as well. And they wanted it, and they wanted to construct it. And they just said, oh, well, we need to get LeBron here. We need to get D-Wade. We already got D-Wade. We need to get Chris Bosh and some other guys. And they're the construction team or whatever, the contractors to build this house. I feel like it's getting to the same place because they want to get there, and how they get there is different. But as for a player's point of view, just because a person can't see what's going to be there doesn't mean that they don't know that it's going to be there. You know what I'm saying? Just because you didn't see that the championship was kind of already pre-made for the Heat doesn't mean that it was already that it wasn't pre-made.
A couple of things is that, still go back to that first part, is that it sounds like a rich person that's just bored. And I think that's probably how a lot of fans felt like when they watched that team. It was exciting, but it was just a rich person spending money in a sense. And it's just like, oh, yeah, if I was rich, I could spend that money too. And it's just like, whatever, like, you just spending money.
It's called a salary cap, you know? you
So
can spend it.
this is the thing, right? Is that that's the next part, right? Is that what's the purpose of the salary cap, right? The purpose of the salary cap, right? In a sense, is to make sure that they keep competitiveness in the NBA, right? And to make sure that there is no monopoly on the sport, right? And that's what the main mindset of it is supposed to be. So I can say that I can see how those situations on both could be kind of weird, because with the Miami team, they built a team. They showed how to manipulate the salary cap for a team with 3 max players or whatever, right? So that was kind of interesting, right? And that was something that hadn't been done before. And it's like, if you're able to do this, are you able to build a team? They didn't know that those players were going to be able to come at the veteran men, and they were able to put it together and show that it worked. And then it got replicated. As far as this other situation, it just really didn't do much. It just felt like them not thinking about competitive balance, them just taking advantage of the situation that they still had guys that were under contract for their rookie deal. So now they can spend a bunch of money on somebody and then in the future try to figure out what their stuff's going to be. So I guess it was a good financial thing for the Warriors to do, like a business type of situation. I can see why it makes sense for KD to come there. I can see why it makes sense for KD for him to come there, and for the Thunder, and for the Warriors. But as far as a basketball part, like, I don't think the Warriors adding that like meant that much. That's why I don't know. Just for the history of the game, I don't think that it felt like it added that much with KD coming there. I think it just was what's the name. But like, if KD thinks that championship was valuable at some point, then hey, go him for a self-meaning, I guess, at the end of the day.
So do you think that a team is obligated to care about competitive balance?
No, I think that the league is obligated to care about competitive balance. And I think that for the integrity of the game, because you're a person that has talked about integrity of the game at some points, I don't think that going to a team that you almost beat to try to win a championship does anything for the game. It's just like, oh, KD changed teams. Where's he at? Oh yeah, he's with the Warriors. Oh, okay. That's how I thought about it. Like, when we talk about fandom, like, I never really wanted to tune into the Warriors to see them once they added KD. It was just like playing against somebody on 2K that has a cheat code, or that's playing with an all-star team. You're just like, you should win. Like, if you lose, then, oh, wow, you lost, but you should win. So it doesn't add any type of excitement because there is no story. Nothing was built. It was just already there. I think it still stems from the type of people that we are with our fandom and our like relationships. Probably like you can find that value in what KD did. And for me, it's a little bit harder because I just don't find the value in him joining the Warriors at that point. So,
yeah. And like I said, as far as that goes, that particular case doesn't affect me whatsoever.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly fine with that decision. And I thought that it actually did make the NBA more interesting because that team was the most exciting team that I had seen probably since the Heat.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was good. I think when you have a team that is probably the best team and you know that they're the best team, I think the ratings bear it out that people watch when there is a dominant team. People like the idea of parity. They like the idea of competitive balance. But not having a villain to root against or not having an overwhelming favorite to root for makes it less interesting in terms of how people consume the sport. I'm pretty sure the ratings bear that out. So for me, it's fine. And I was more interested. And in terms of competitive balance, yes, the NBA is in charge of that, but a team's job is the ultimate ring chaser. So the team itself needs to be chasing rings, definitely. And that's what a team can do, and they should do that if they're a competitive team. If the owner is competitive, then it's his job, and it filters down to everyone else that they have to make whatever moves they can within the rules in order to win the games. And so by getting your team as stacked as possible, and if for some reason you are chosen by one of the better players in the game to add to an already stacked roster, you don't question it. You just do it and let everybody else catch up. The Warriors claim to be light years ahead of everyone, and they were untouchable for a 2-3 year span, pretty much, until KD went down and they lost to the Raptors. So I think that, yes, the league has to do something about competitive balance, but if it's not breaking any rules, what can they do? I mean, they shouldn't have vetoed that Chris Paul trade, really. So, there's a lot of things that the league's done that's overstepped already.
Yeah, like I said, I feel like everything's always going to change, right? We're always going to have some type of opinion or thought about like what goes on, right, or like what takes place, because that's just how we are and like how we're like set to be. And like I said, like as a team standpoint, I can definitely see the investment that they do with bringing in KD. But like again, like I said, like I feel like it's just one of those things that it's different. Just like it could have went that way. It could have went super bad for KD's career. He could have ended up being the Christian Wilkins of the NBA, try to go to a team that was super strong, you know what I mean, and not work out, right? Because you didn't have room to grow. You didn't have room to like really show who you were, and it never really felt like your opportunity. Luckily, that wasn't going to happen because he was with the Golden State Warriors, and he is KD, which is one of the great players who I will say is definitely a Hall of Famer. So like I said, I mean, at this point, like it's to each his own. For me, like I didn't really think of Golden State too much as a team to cheer for or a team to hate. I just kind of viewed them as a team that kind of like copped out. So I wasn't interested at all in them. So I think that's kind of like the thing for me is like it just didn't make me interested in basketball. It didn't make me interested in watching them to see how good or how bad they were going to be. It just felt like I got cheated, I guess, in a sense, as a fan of the game. So, and again, that's my thing, right? Like, it's his decision to do whatever he wants. But like I said, maybe that's just my thing. Maybe as a fan of the game, I just felt cheated and I didn't feel it didn't go down right. So, congrats to KD. He has a championship. Now he's in Brooklyn, going for another. So good luck with that next championship. Hopefully they can make it interesting out there with him and Kyrie. So. Outside of that, this is Beyond Sports with Paul and Jeremy. I'm Paul.
I'm Jeremy.
Thanks for checking out the first part of Championship Chasing. Make sure you join us for the second part of our discussion and see where we take you guys next.